I think when somebody's talking to you, one of the things that I'm trying to learn is stop thinking about what you're going to say next, because I'm making assumptions and I'm jumping to a conclusion and I'm about to give my response. But if I don't fully listen, I could have made the wrong assumption. And a lot of times I do. Really, the best way to respond when somebody's communicating something to you, especially if it's more serious, is with a question. Because what you're doing is you're digging into what they mean, and that actually keeps you from thinking about what you're going to say and makes you come up with a question about what they're talking about, which actually makes you focus.
Yeah.
So that's a practice.
Welcome to the Loving God, Loving People podcast, where we talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus in our everyday lives and how, in the end, all that matters is God and people. Here's today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. We're talking about relationships, and we're talking about today this topic of listening. And I'm gonna tell you, Chad, there's been lots of moments in my marriage that my wife is talking to me, and I don't know if this is just a guy thing or if it's just a me thing, but I've responded to whatever she said, whatever question she asked, and it turns out I was just automatically responding. I didn't actually understand anything that she was saying or didn't hear, but I'm just like, yeah. Okay, and your brain's somewhere else, or I'm on my phone doing something else. And over time, I had to learn to just confess to her, hey, I don't know what I just said yes to, but I wasn't listening. And so now she appreciates that I acknowledge that I wasn't listening. But have you ever struggled with listening, Chad? Not hearing, but listening.
No, never. You're the only
one.
one.
Okay, good. I thought that might be the case.
It might just be me. Of course I have, especially in the modern world. I have many times been looking at my phone when somebody's trying to talk to me. And it's, the three most important people in my life are my wife and my two boys. And I do that to them a lot.
Yeah.
So I'll confess that sin. I'm learning to do better, but I 100% can relate to what you just said. Listening is a lost art, I think, in our culture. And sometimes I'm more cultural than I am Christian in the realm of listening, for sure.
You mentioned there's a lot of distractions, and part of listening is being fully present, and it's really hard to be fully present in the culture with technology, with all the things that we have. And even when there are moments of pause, we fill it, right? We're allowing distraction. We're actually inviting distraction into our life. So how can we, in the modern world, how can we be fully present when we're with somebody to give them this gift of listening?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about this in this series, and it'll be, if you choose to listen to that sermon, come to church, or listen to it online, it'll be one of the most practical sermons you've ever heard on just how to listen. But a few things. You have to be really intentional about it, because in our modern culture, we don't naturally listen, which means you have to think about what you're doing. So this is not a brag. This happens fairly regularly, not at work, which means I need to do better at work. But a lot of times when I'm out and about, people will tell me, hey, you're a good listener. And I always think to myself, man, who have you been hanging out with, right? But I think one of the things is I've learned to, over time, at least I try to do this in being intentional, is when somebody's talking to me, I look at them. And I actually learned that at home, because instead of looking at my phone, I'd reach over, intentionally set it down, when I'm correct. I'm not always correct. But when I do get it right, I set my phone down. I'm looking at my wife, or I'm looking at, right now my oldest is out of the house, but I'm looking at my youngest, as he's talking to me. So one of the most practical things you can do is just look at the person who's talking. And look them in the eye, appropriately, and focus.
Yeah.
And so it's again, when I'm kind of out and about, and it's fairly regular, hey, you're a really good listener. And I think it's as simple as I'm just looking at them while they're talking.
Yeah.
And people aren't used to that.
Yeah. Now, I can look at somebody, but my brain can be thinking about something
That's
else.
exactly right.
And I can make eye contact and even nod my head, but I'm thinking about, man, where am I going to get lunch today, and what's going to happen, this evening or whatever. And my mind can go other places. So how do you discipline your mind to actually be focused and actually care about what the person is saying?
Well, one of the things we were talking about, distractions.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when I go on a date with my wife, I don't take my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I used to just not look at my phone, but then like she'd get up and go to the bathroom or whatever, and then I look at my phone, and then I see an email, and I'm pissed off when she comes back.
Yep.
And then I'm like, ooh, I just ruined date night because I looked at my phone while she was. So now I just leave it at home. So that's an idea of being intentional. If you're there to spend time with somebody, one of you have a phone in case there's an emergency, but the other one doesn't, right? And you're paying attention. I think when somebody's talking to you, one of the things that I'm trying to learn is stop thinking about what you're going to say next, because I'm making assumptions and I'm jumping to a conclusion and I'm about to give my response. But if I don't fully listen, I could have made the wrong assumption. And a lot of times I do. Really, the best way to respond when somebody's communicating something to you, especially if it's more serious, is with a question. Because what you're doing is you're digging into what they mean, and that actually keeps you from thinking about what you're going to say and makes you come up with a question about what they're talking about, which actually makes you focus.
Yeah.
So that's a practice.
And if you are in a relationship where you seriously struggle, something that's also helpful, if somebody, this happens a lot in conflict, if there's a conflict, you're thinking about your rebuttal, right? You're thinking about your response, because they're saying, and not all conversations are conflict, but in this example, say there's a conflict, what you want to do is you want to actually just repeat back what you heard the person say and let them confirm that that's what they said. Because we all communicate differently. We communicate with our eyes. We communicate with our hands. We communicate with the tone of our voice. We want to make sure that we're listening not just to hear the words, but to understand what's behind them. And so to your point, asking questions, drawing that out, and going, hey, it sounds like you're really upset about this because X, Y, Z, and let them respond back to you and go, that's not what I'm talking about at all. Because sometimes you're missing it, and you're going to debate something that is not actually even the issue that person's bringing to the table.
Well, the majority of fights that I've had with my wife, and her and I got in an argument here recently, but the majority of those are based on false assumptions.
Yeah.
I mean, like 9.999 out of 10.
Yeah.
My wife and I are actually similar. We're different in a lot of ways, but we're similar in a lot of ways. And we do typically, in the end, tend to agree on the vast majority of things. There's a few disagreements, right? And then she's listening to this right now, and she's thinking, yeah, but he'll eventually come around. He'll think about it and come around, right? Which might be, which is probably true. But yeah, a huge majority of our conflict and our arguments that we've gotten in are based on false assumptions, just poor listening.
There was this moment recently. My wife and I, we were out in California. She was there for a work thing, and she says, "Hey, we're going to go out to dinner, actually at the house of one of my coworkers who's out here, and her husband." I'm like, okay, great. And we're going to go there. And I was thinking, and we're bringing our kids, and, how long are we going to be here for? And this is going to take forever. Are we going to be there? Are we going to miss out on us doing family stuff? And so I was kind of dragging my feet going into this thing. And this couple, Christian couple, were two of the best listeners I've ever met in my life. They engaged with our kids, and they just asked questions, and they were curious, and they were interested in getting to know them, and they would comment on things and encourage them in things. But I was just blown away watching somebody older engage with my kids in a way. And at the end of it, they were like, your kids are so great. And they were so encouraging to us. And I'm like, why did I drag my feet going into this thing? Because it was beautiful. And what made it beautiful was this gift of listening. And we asked them questions too. It wasn't just, they were asking us, but we were getting to know them, getting to know their story, and just realizing people are very interesting. If you choose to be interested in people, you'll find people are very interesting and get to know stories and things about them you would never have any idea. And it's fascinating. And it's actually kind of fun to get to know people, but it's a lost art to asking questions. Yeah. And so how would you say for somebody to, if they want to engage somebody, because you're really good at this, especially in social settings where you don't know anybody, you're good at asking questions. How do you come up with the questions? What are the things that you use to start to engage people, to get them to open up, to feel comfortable, to begin talking?
Well, you ask them about themselves because they are their favorite subject. That's true for all of us. And actually, it's just really, really simple things. In fact, I don't remember the acrostic you gave one time where you were
form.
Form.
Yes.
Why don't you share that?
All right,
Because
so-
that is a great way to approach somebody that you don't know
Yeah.
and ask good questions to listen to them.
So they actually teach this in sales. If you're, cold call or you're having a conversation or you're in a social setting, you don't know anybody. FORM is an acrostic, an acronym that stands for family. So, hey, tell me about your family. Oh, do you have kids? Oh, tell me about your kids. What sports do they play? Oh, what school are they at? What grade are they in? What do they like doing, not like doing? Tell me about I love talking about my kids. I will talk about my kids all day long. If you're curious about my kids, sit down, let's talk, because I'm going to want to brag on them and tell you all the things that I'm learning as a parent. O is occupation. Okay, so what do you do for work? Oh, some people right away you realize they hate their job, whatever. And so, oh man, have you ever thought about doing anything else or whatever? But occupation, because we spend a ton of our time in the workplace. And for a lot of people, that's where a lot of just passions and things that have drawn us into that field. Oh, why'd you get into that? Now, sometimes somebody says, well, I'm an accountant. That's the end of that conversation. But sometimes they say, oh, I do this and it's interesting, and you ask more questions about their work. R is recreation. What do you do for fun? What do you enjoy doing, Chad? I know you like fishing. Oh, tell me about the best fishing spot you've been to recently. People like to talk about that. And then motivation. Just what are your desires, deep drives that you have? And motivation, now you're getting a little bit deeper in the conversation with the person and just trying to get to know what makes them tick, what drives them. But those are 4 easy topics that you could come up with a dozen questions on each one of those. And you'd be the star of the evening. People going, wow, that guy was so interesting. Chad, you talked about being at a sales event, and everybody thought you were the most interesting person, but they knew nothing about you.
That's exactly right.
And it was just because you asked questions and listened.
Well, I got invited to a rich people camp. I had a buddy that did really well one year, and they do these free trips, and he was single at the time and was in recovery, and so he wanted some accountability. So he's like, I'm going to take my pastor, right?
You were his plus one?
Yeah, so I got to stay in this really nice place and meet all these people that were making high 6 figures and more. And yeah, he said, everybody keeps telling me how cool you are, but they don't know who you are and that you're a pastor. I go, yeah, they don't know anything about me. I'm just asking them about them. So it's funny how that works. And I actually didn't know that's what was going to happen, but it was just funny at the end of the week that was the result. So I'm going to say it again. So form, so family,
Yep.
occupation, recreation, motivation.
Yep.
So you ask people about those 4 subjects.
Yeah.
That's really good.
And those are easy go-tos. I will say one of the things to tie this into the ministry of Jesus, there's this moment before Jesus goes to the cross, and he's with his disciples, and he gets up and he wraps a towel around his waist, and he goes around and he starts washing their feet. Well, back in that day, they're walking around in sandals. The roads aren't paved. It's dirt, and there's animal feces and all that. It's a need at the time. It was a cultural need, and servants would do that so that when people are eating, their feet aren't all nasty as they're reclining there next to the table or leaning against the table while they eat. And so they would wash their feet, and they would rinse off everything from their travel. So Jesus does that. He models that. Peter's like, no, don't do it. And then Jesus is like, if I don't wash you, like, you have no part. And he's like, okay, do the whole thing. And he gets done and he says, I've set an example for you guys. And he says, if you do these things, you will be blessed. He says, I'm modeling for you what I expect of you, that you take on this posture of a servant. Well, I think culturally, if you just go around washing people's feet, you're going to be weird. That's not something we need. We have socks, shoes, and paved roads and cars. And so it looks different now. But I do think that washing feet at that time is equivalent to listening today, that it is the modern day washing of feet, to listen in a culture where everybody's talking, everybody has a voice, everybody's posting things, liking, disliking, commenting, watching The Voice and going, that guy's pitchy. Everybody's got a comment about everything, a criticism about everything, but there's not a lot of people going around listening.
Yeah.
And so I think there's opportunity for us when Jesus says, hey, do what I've modeled for you, serve people, and you will be blessed. I actually think we'll experience blessing by listening. And if you're like, well, I just wish somebody would listen to me. By listening to other people, I bet, 1, you're going to experience a blessing through that because Jesus says you will. And 2, you might actually find somebody begins to be curious of you and ask you questions as well. But don't wait for somebody else to do that. Lead off with that. Follow the example of Jesus and serve people by listening.
Yeah, well, to listen is to love. So when you listen to somebody, you're saying, I see you, I value you, I respect you enough to hear what you have to say. You're giving them attention.
Yeah.
To listen is to love. And I agree with you. It is a modern day version of foot washing because people are not used to that. I said earlier in the conversation, I mean, people aren't even used to you looking them in the eye, you know? So really, really important. Let's kind of break this down a little bit. So listen with your eyes. You want to look at somebody when they're talking. Instead of thinking about what you're going to say, be thinking about what question you're going to ask based on what they are saying.
Yeah.
Which causes you to focus. I would say the third thing too, you want to listen with your heart. There's what they're saying versus what they actually mean.
Yeah.
Right? So if I get in an argument with somebody, a lot of times I'm picking on their words instead of really listening to their heart and what they're actually trying to say.
Yeah.
And so I think we want to listen with our hearts and try to have full understanding. This is why if you're going to have an important conversation or you need to bring up something that's uncomfortable, you don't want to do that on email. You don't want to do that via text because there's no voice inflection.
You can read it however you want to read it.
You cannot listen with your heart or your eyes through text or email. And listening with your eyes and your heart are very important aspects of good listening. And so I think it's really important that we engage with people, you know. So this happened yesterday. I texted my son in the morning. That's away, my older son. And it was something from a long time ago when he was having a difficult time, and I had him make a little list, and he's just killing it in life right now. He's in a good season. So I sent him the list we made when he was in the more difficult season. I said, how you doing with this list? And of course he wrote back, you know, he's killing it or whatever. But then he called me last night. And what I appreciate about this 20-year-old young man is he knows there's texting, but then there's talking.
Yeah.
And I would say if you are under 35 years of age, texting is not talking. Texting is a form of communication, but it's not even close to the best form.
Yeah.
So if you really want to connect with somebody, right, talk with them. Now, yesterday he didn't FaceTime with me. We were just talking on the phone, but I could hear his voice. You know, I put him on speakerphone because mom and brother were there and we were all talking to him. But that's just so much more engaging and so such a better form of communication than just texting. Now, ideally, we're sitting in front of each other talking. The other thing I would say, since I'm giving a parent example, is I used to try to talk with my boys just sitting there, let's talk. Well, no, they don't do that. We have to be doing something with our hands. So you can throw a ball and talk.
Yep.
You can eat chicken wings and talk, right? You can play a game and talk, and that could even be a video game. But they're doing something with their hands, so they're you know engaging a little more. We got a hot tub a couple of years ago, and one of the reasons, I mean, one of several, there were other reasons, obviously, but our boys will talk to us in the hot tub.
Yeah.
And it's
they're afraid to bring their phones in because they'll drop them in the water, and so now it's technology free time.
That's exactly right. So we would go out there and actually have conversations. Hot tub was just the excuse.
Yep.
So there's little nuances like that you can do to maybe open up communication, especially with your kids. But back where I started, don't have serious, engaging communication. Don't try to do that through text or email. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
If you've got a hard conversation you need to have at work, get up out of your office, walk down the hall, and go have the conversation. And I think a lot of times we use text and email because we lack courage.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, too, if you're dating or married, pick dates where you know you're going to talk to each other. Like going to the movies is great, and I love going to the movies, but my wife and I realized that's not really good for us because we sit down and we're absorbing entertainment, but there was no real connection for us with each other. And so now we'll do things like we'll go paddleboarding together because now we're hours on the water and we're doing something, but we're just engaging and talking about whatever. And, you know, sometimes people watching, and that gets a little bit entertaining. And we'll do that, or we'll go for walks and we'll do that kind of stuff. The hot tub's a great example where you're just forced to have conversation. And there's times that she'll see it and I'll see it in her too, where our minds will begin to engage with something. She can tell, oh, Robert's thinking about something. And we've just gotten into the habit of going, hey, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, we do that.
And just being curious about what's on that person's mind that's engaging their mind. And even by talking about that, sometimes that just helps free up that person to at least express, now this is what's on my heart, on my mind. Or sometimes we'll have great conversations about that random thought that we're trapped in. And so be curious about the person. Ask them, hey, what are you thinking about if it's quiet and awkward? We do that on car rides all the time. And sometimes it's hilarious because what we're thinking about is a total rabbit trail. And then we try to explain how we got there and what triggered it. And the human mind is a very interesting thing. But yeah, be curious about what the person's thinking about.
Yeah, I would say that's so important if you're married to an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of weird. I would call myself an ambivert. I have introvert traits and I have extrovert traits. And the truth is all of us are that way. But one of the things that I do in an extroverted way is I think out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife typically knows what I'm thinking because I'm thinking out loud. And a lot of times I don't know what I think until I say it out loud, right? Where she's more of an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
And so with her, I have to dig a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're married, I would just say, know who you're married to. You know, study them, pay attention. If my wife's not ready to talk about it and she says that really means she's not ready to talk about it, because while I'm externally processing, she needs to internally process before she's ready to talk about it. So there's all of these mutual respect things in communication. I think sometimes we project ourselves onto the other person. We all do that. So I would just say be careful about that. But yeah, if you're married to an introverted person, you got to dig a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Where an extroverted person, you're like, do they ever shut up? They're just running with you on the journey of their thought process. So just to kind of recap again, just some important things. Listen with your eyes. Listen with your focus, meaning you're gonna not think about what you're gonna say, but you're gonna ask them a question about what they're saying, which makes you dig in. Listen with your heart. And then, to your point, set aside those distractions. Yeah. And and dig in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the more you can make this a pattern, the better you'll get at it. This is something that, just like anything, practice is going to make you stronger at it. If you're a family, you sit around the dinner table or whatever, you have time. One thing we do is we just say, hey, high, low. What was your high today? What was your low today? And we've been doing that for years with our kids. And now they'll just open up with us. Oh man, this is my highlight from today. And oh yeah, this was a little frustrating. And sometimes if we know it's kind of been a low day, we're like, all right, highlights only. What's everybody's highlight from today? Keep it positive. But get them in the habit of talking and asking questions, and get your kids involved in that process too.
It's so good. We were at high school camp a few weeks ago, and our friend Grant Botma, he's been on the podcast. He was there, and he was like the therapeutic barista for all the adult volunteers. He was making killer coffee and having conversations. But he did something interesting, kind of like what you just said. He said, "What's your happy and your crappy?" Yep. Like what was the happiest part of yesterday and what was the crappiest part of yesterday? And I'm like, that's really good. I'm going to start doing that with my son.
Or if you're from the 80s, you can call it rose and thorn. Yeah, there's lots of different versions. Yeah, every rose has its thorn, Chad. I know you're singing
Guns
that song.
N' Roses. Yeah, I'm like, I am a child of the 80s, and I didn't get that out of the great. Happy and crappy.
So you can do happy, crappy, high, low, rose, thorn.
Yeah.
All the same thing.
Yeah, bottom line, to listen is to love. And if you have people in your life that you really care for, I would encourage you to really work on being a better listener, because it is how you communicate your love for them. And we can all grow in this. Yeah. So to listen is to love.
Thanks for watching this week's episode of the Loving God, Loving People podcast. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and click the bell so that you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this conversation, we'd love it if you like this video, leave us a comment, and even share it with a friend. Doing that will help more people meet, know, and follow Jesus. And lastly, you are always welcome to join us each week for one of our services right here live on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.